We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.
Historic football collector Ken McGee visits the Pigpen recently to discuss his upcoming book, The Michigan Football Programs and Ticket Guide. Ken has the largest collection of University of Michigan football memorabilia in all the land, and he shares it in his new book and with us on the podcast in this episode coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pigpen, your portal to positive football history. And we have a great episode tonight because we are going to talk to an author that has wrote a book called The Ultimate Michigan Football Program and Ticket Guide. His name is Ken McGee, and we're going to bring him in right now. Ken McGee, welcome to the Pigpen.
Thank you very much. I'm all set and ready to go. Glad to be here, Darren.
Ken, we are certainly glad to have you, but why don't you tell us a little bit what's entailed with the book, like sort of the dust cover version?
Well, what I'd like to point out about the book is this. I don't think there's ever been a book ever done like this in the history of all of sports, not just football, including basketball, the Olympics, football, hockey, you name it, any other sport. I don't think there's ever been one done. I saw a book recently published that had a lot of ticket stubs from the New York Yankees, but not as extensive as what we've got cooking here. What we have here is what's called the Ultimate Michigan Football Program and Ticket Guide. It is a 680-page hardcover, color, 2,500 photographs of every known program and ticket ever to exist. The majority of these are in my collection, but I've reached out to over 50 contributors and several resource libraries and museums as well to get additional images. So, for example, if I had a ticket stub from the 1950 Michigan-Ohio State game at Ohio, the Snow Bowl, very historic game, if I had this stub that was torn in half and a friend of mine might have had a complete ticket from the game, I borrowed the image of the complete ticket. So we try and get as many complete tickets in the book as possible. But again, it's the color pages, and not only do we have the photographs, but you have a synopsis of every single game ever played. And there's some other things we've got in the book as well, such as the history of where Michigan played at Michigan Stadium and Regents Field and some of the other fields. And we talk about the evolution of the point scoring system. We also talk about history and how history parallels football in a lot of different ways. And we can talk about that in a little bit.
If my math is right, you're saying you have 2,500 different images on 600 some odd pages. So you have 3 to 4 images on every page on average.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And sometimes we even have more, because if we had a ticket stub that was on the left side and a ticket from another source on the right side, we would put them together and have a small little line between the two of them so people could see both sides of the ticket. But you're exactly right. For the most part, on every page, there are 4 photographs and 2 programs and 2 tickets, because there's a synopsis on each game as well. So, and that's one of the neat things, the synopsis of every game you can read about what happened. So we have the location, the score, the attendance, and then about the amount of text that you might find probably the size of a baseball card.
Very interesting. Come back to the book a little bit, but I want to learn more about Ken McGee. Now, I mean, to put together a collection, which sounds very vast if most of it's from your own collection, what is sort of that watershed moment that made you want to start collecting tickets and program and memorabilia of Michigan football?
Well, when I was a little boy, I was born and raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Bo Schembechler came to Ann Arbor and became a family friend. His wife was like a second mother to me. His kids and I are friends still. I went to the Michigan-Maryland game with one of his boys a few years ago at Maryland. When Shemmy Schembechler visits from Columbus, Ohio, which is where he lives, believe it or not, he stays at the house. So Schembechlers have been part of my life for a long time. When I was about 5 years old, though, my mom took me to my first Michigan football game. I loved it. I fell in love with it. My older brother collected baseball cards, and I saw a program and I picked it up, and then I started looking at the ticket stubs. So I started collecting programs and ticket stubs when I was just a little boy. And so as time goes on, as you grow, as you mature, and as you get more sophisticated and you make more money in your careers and things of that nature, you're able to search and pay more for some of these items. Interestingly enough, so I grew up and I went to college. I went to Michigan State University, as a matter of fact, and I majored in criminal justice. And I was a walk-on kicker on the football team. And my best friend was Ray Stackwitz, a four-time All-Big Ten, also All-American punter at Michigan State. And he convinced me into trying out because I was a martial artist. Well, I was pretty good as a walk-on. However, they recruited a guy by the name of Morton Anderson right around that time. So my locker was emptied pretty quickly. Morton Anderson.
Sounds like a death blow to the career right there, right?
It was. And Morton and I were friends, and we were both in Ray's wedding. So I have a lot of background with Big Ten football. But when you're born and raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan, whether I went to school at Michigan State or not, it's kind of the culture that you grow up in. And I'll never forget, I was at a barbecue and a friend of mine his mom said to me in front of Bo Schembechler, "Hey, Kenny, now that you're going to Michigan State, who are you pulling for in a big game?" I didn't know what to say in front of Bo. So Bo says, "Kenny, before you answer that question, let me tell you one thing. I would feel very little respect for an individual who was not pulling for the school that he was attending." So he answered it for me that, yeah, I'm going to root for Michigan State while I'm going there. But then when I came home, so I just looked at him and I said, "Bo, thank you very much. I graduate in 2 years. I'll be back." And so Bo was just a great guy. So as I graduated from college, and then I was a federal agent. I traveled all around the world, and I lived in various parts of the United States. So a lot of times during my days off or whatever, I'd go to antique shows, I'd go to sports conventions and things of that nature. So I was just all over the place. I was able to seek and search for these items tremendously. And I've also built a whole network of friends through collecting. So that's a little bit about me. When I retired in the year 2008, the project that I had always talked about doing, I said, I'm going to start working on this book a little bit more. I'm going to start working on it, collecting and putting things together. But before I retired, I became friends with the head of the Secret Service that was in charge of President Gerald Ford's protection detail. And he put me in touch with the president, and I told the president my idea, and we communicated back and forth, and he wrote the introductory letter to my book. So President Ford has been deceased for almost 20 years, and the book comes out now. But back in the mid-90s, he wrote a letter for me on behalf of this project, which I'm extremely proud of.
Well,
so
you certainly should be, because he was quite the player for the Wolverines back in the day.
Yeah, he was a good football player. He was a good football player, and most valuable player, sadly, on the worst team that Michigan ever fielded. They were 1-7 that year, and he was the MVP. But so as we progressed through time, about 4 years ago, I met another collector, and we collaborated on another book, which is called The Ultimate Guide to Michigan Sports Memorabilia, which is over 500 pages with almost 7,000 photographs. And it's all of Michigan sports memorabilia when it comes to football: pennants and bobbleheads and trinkets and coins and matchbook covers and cards and statues and posters and frames, artwork, you name it. It was in there. Lots of stuff: pins, lapel pins, buttons. But we purposely left the programs and the tickets out because I said to him, I want to do exclusively a book on programs and tickets. So once that book was published a few years ago, we started working on this one, and we got delayed a little bit by COVID, but we were fortunate enough to be able to put this whole thing together, and it's coming to our hands from the publishers on August 12th. So we're extremely excited about that.
Well, we're going to do this again, but why don't we take this opportunity to let people know, can they pre-order the book or when?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Why don't you give them some information?
Sure. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the book as well. So the first thing is you can go to the website, umishfootball.com, and I'll spell that out. U like university, Mich like you would abbreviate Michigan, MICH, football.com, umishfootball.com. If anybody has any questions, they can always call me as well at area code 503-781-3174. Again, that's 503-781-3174. And I live in Michigan, but that's an Oregon area code. That's where one of my posts as a federal agent I was assigned, and I just hung on to my cell phone. Now, let me tell you about the ordering instructions as well. During the pre-order phase, we are self-publishing this book. There's a limited amount of books being printed. And so we are offering a $10 discount to anybody that goes to the website pre-ordering and enters the code Go Blue, just like you would say at a Michigan football game, Go Blue, GOBLUE. And that allows you to have a $10 discount. But one of the other perks that we put together was we created a special card. There's an artist here in the Midwest that did a series of prints that were the pictures of the University of Michigan football uniforms from the inception of Michigan football to the present. And so we have a postcard, a large postcard suitable for framing. I say it's a postcard, but it's more of a card, and it shows this limited edition card is out, and it shows the series of Michigan uniforms through the years, and those will be numbered, and they come exclusively with the books that are all involved in the pre-order. So umishfootball.com, 503-781-3174. Go Blue, that gives you a $10 discount and also gets you the card. And that's until we pick up the books on August 12th. And then they'll go back up to face value.
Well, okay. We will remind the listeners at the end of this podcast too. Again, we'll have you spell that out again for them. But we just want to give them a couple different times to hear that. It's very important to get these pre-ordered. So I assume once it's out and released, that will also be the place after August 12th to order the book also?
Absolutely. And if you don't get to that website, a local store by the name of the M Den bought numerous copies. M Den is M like Michigan, Den like a living room, DEN, M Den. So we've got those two options. I don't think the M Den books are coming with a limited edition postcard because this is something we just came up to enhance orders in the final stretch. And we're looking for pre-orders. And that's one of the reasons why we're here speaking, Darren, besides speaking about this great book.
Well, the postcard is definitely a nice touch and an initiative to get people, getting that book on order. So very, very well done. So I'm sure that would make a great wall hanging for anybody, a football fan. So that's pretty spectacular. Now, Ken, let's go into your collection a little bit. Now, why don't you give me 3 things from your collection that are in the book that we're going to see pictures of that you are extremely psyched about and people are going to get really, really stoked about?
Sure. Well, one of the first things, one of the coolest items in my collection is I have the football program between Michigan and Yale that was played in 1881. It was the 5th game that Michigan has ever played. Michigan went to the East Coast and played a triple header against the East Coast powerhouses and Princeton, Harvard, and Michigan. And they only had one program that we know that exists, and that was for the 1881 Yale. And if you wonder what it looks like, I'm going to hold it up so you can see it, and it might be hard with the reflection, but you can see it's a little bit bigger than a postcard, and it says Michigan versus Yale 1881. And so when I picked up this program about 10 years ago from a guy in Tennessee, he said he got it out of a scrapbook from a place out of Chicago, And so on the back of and another page in the scrapbook was the Amherst Yale program. And what I did was I said, I want to buy that too, just to add provenance to what I actually have here. So that's one of the neatest items in the collection that I have. And then downstairs, I don't have it in my hands right now, was the 1902 Rose Bowl program between Michigan and Stanford, the very first Rose Bowl. You'll see images of that in the program as well. And then probably my other favorite piece in the whole collection is this item right here. And this is a ticket stub from 1898. It is Michigan versus Chicago playing on Thanksgiving Day in 1898. And it was this game that Michigan defeated Chicago in an upset. And a young music student by the name of Louis Elbel on a train ride home penned a little song by the name of The Victors, also known as Hail to the Victors, Michigan's fight song. So it was this game that inspired that song. And the interesting thing about this, when I purchased this ticket from somebody on the West Coast, I thought this is a one-of-a-kind item, and it's seat number 202. And I thought I'll never see one of these again. And when I bought it, took great care of it. 6 months later, I get contacted by another dealer on the other side of the United States who said that they had one of these tickets. And I thought, okay, somebody's got a Xerox copy of the ticket that I got, and they're trying to pass it off. And lo and behold, it was seat number 201. So my theory and my thought is that somebody found a scrapbook, had two of these tickets in it, sold one to a dealer on the West Coast and one to the East Coast dealer, and they both contacted me. So those are three of my favorite items. Some of my favorite artwork is, for example,
okay, can we just stop and talk about those three items real quick, and I'll let you get back to the artwork.
Sure.
I mean, those are three very significant items. First of all, you have Yale 1881. That's like one of the first years, I believe, that Walter Camp was coaching Yale. So that's very significant. The father of modern football.
He's not listed on the program. I have looked for them. Yep.
Okay, so that's pretty significant. You have the 1902 Rose Bowl, the first Rose Bowl, I believe, was who was coaching Michigan at that time?
It was Fielding Yo's first year. And real quick, we keep on referring to the Yale thing as a program. In reality, it's more of a scorecard. There's nothing on the back. It's more of a scorecard.
Okay.
A little bit bigger than a postcard. But then the 1902 Rose Bowl program is approximately 40 pages. And that's very neat. And one of the things I did with that is I worked with the university and I made high resolution scans of every page. And we market that program as well in duplicate form. And it's noted on the back that it's a reproduction with a limited edition amount of those, because no one can really afford a 1902 Rose Bowl program unless you invest part of your retirement like I did. And so my point is we made them much more manageable for people to get and be able to see them. There's only about 5 or 6 known to exist. And that was a great game. Michigan defeated Stanford 49-0, and it was Fielding Yo's point-a-minute team. I believe they were unscored upon that season.
Well, yeah, that's truly tremendous. And then you had that third item that you told us about, the 1898 game against Chicago. I believe that's one of the first years that a guy named Amos Alonzo Stagg was coaching Chicago. And they were pretty much a powerhouse, because people might sit there and say, well, Michigan against Chicago, we don't even know University of Chicago as a team. Well, University of Chicago was the team in the Midwest back then. And for Michigan to knock them off, that was a pretty big deal.
They were the biggest, best team in what they called the West, even though it's the Midwest. People on the East Coast refer to Chicago as a Western team. And that's where you get the words in the song Champions of the West when it comes to the Victors song. And interestingly enough, when it comes to this ticket as well, it's got an image on it of the football players playing. It's really spectacular. When you think about it, it was $2 back then, and it was in 1898. So what would $2 be now for a ticket? I'm not exactly sure, but it must have been a lot of money back then.
I'm sure it was. Okay, and I'm sorry I interrupted you from showing us another piece of your collection.
Sure. No worries.
I just wanted to point out those are some pretty big games that you showed us there.
Well, I could show you thousands of images, but when you pick up the book, you'll be able to see them for yourself. But I'm going to show you some of my favorite images when it comes to programs. And that is, for example, this 1907 Michigan, Pennsylvania program. It's just beautiful. The artwork with the way the player is wearing his sweater with the Block M on it, which is basically his jersey. It's a turtleneck sweater, and just the artwork on it. The colors are amazing.
Yeah, that is beautiful. They had some great artists back in the day doing graphics for tickets and any paraphernalia for football back then. They're great artists. Artwork.
Things are so much different now with the photographs and the slick covers and things like that. The old ones are just incredible. Like here's another very, very neat one. And this is 1917 Michigan at Pennsylvania. You can just see the beautiful colored artwork there. And with they have
flat top leather helmets on, it looks like in the graphic.
Exactly. Flat top leather helmets. And these guys have cleats on, and they got probably bamboo as their thigh pads. And just the artwork there with the football in the background is unbelievable. And then there are some programs that are just as simple as can be. Not my favorites, but they definitely are historic. For example, this one is just made out of newspaper print. It's 8 pages. It's got a picture of Fielding Yost on a cover. This is 1917 Michigan playing Detroit. And these things are extremely brittle because the acidification of the paper over the years takes its toll and creates a brittle paper. And one of the things I also like, sometimes old programs are almost like pen and ink dots. And here's a 1914 Michigan at Michigan State program. Or at the time, it was Michigan Agricultural College, MAC. Then you've got another neat program, just the artwork. Here's 1913 Pennsylvania at Michigan. And just the artwork on the cover of this one showing this Michigan Wolverine in his uniform and with his helmet wrapped around his arm and the sweater jersey as well. It's just the artwork where he's sitting there. It looks like he's resting on the bench.
Yeah, he's got a big gold M on a light blue sweater. It really pops out just to help the audience appreciate what we're looking at here.
And then the next program, and the audience will describe this to you. This was in 1918. Michigan played Michigan State in this game. And you can see at the top, there are soldiers marching at the top and soldiers marching. And the artwork where it's got a platoon of probably 20 soldiers on the top and 20 soldiers at the bottom marching. And obviously this was during the breakout of World War I. And you can see the Michigan player carrying the ball, but in great artwork being chased by a Michigan State player. And the artwork on this one's incredible as well. But what I wanted to point out, in a lot of the programs over time, history mirrors football quite frequently when it comes to cover art. For example, in the late 20s, the Michigan Indiana program shows a picture of an airplane, and it says on the airplane, Spirit of Bloomington, which is obviously a takeoff on Spirit of St. Louis when Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic for the first time. So there's other war cover programs. In the mid 40s, early 40s, we've got World War II. There's some war themed programs there as well. And so every decade or so, events transpire where we just see certain things that mirror society. One of the programs in 1925, Michigan Ohio State program, shows a limousine, not necessarily a limousine, but it would have been a limousine back then, just a beautiful art graphic of a car pulling up. So therefore, they're really showing off the fact that vehicles were starting to become a mode of transportation and a high commodity here in America. So
yeah, very, very cool. Now, I have a question to ask you about, okay, as a collector, and maybe it's something you even have in the book, what is one thing that you sort of caught you by surprise that you found that you were able to acquire for your collection? Something you weren't expecting and sort of blindsided you, and maybe you have a little story about that.
Oh, the 1902 Rose Bowl program, definitely. A gentleman called me out of the East Coast. The details of the transaction remain private, but he contacted me out of the blue, and it was in the five figures, the cost of the program. And I also traded him some old Michigan football stadium seats from originally installed Michigan Stadium, as well as the cash. And then I went to a football game out in Connecticut where Michigan played. I hand delivered the football seats, but that was one of the main things. And some of the other things that come out of the blue is when you get a call about a scrapbook, there's nothing more exciting when it comes to collecting is when somebody says, I got a scrapbook from the 20s. And I don't care what's in it. If it's from Michigan, I want it. And the reason is because a lot of people don't know that back in the old days, students would have a football schedule written on the back of their class schedule card. So they glue in this scrapbook a card, but you can see the classes that they had: biology, history, astronomy, whatever, and their grades. But no one over time knows that chances are there's a schedule on the back, an official schedule. So I've honed my skills and learned how to soak pages out of programs and items out of programs, because a lot of the programs back in the teens and 20s were glued in with water soluble, and tickets as well, water soluble glue. So you have to learn how to soak them, and you take your time, and then you blot dry them, and certain colors run a little bit more, and you got to be careful about that. But when it comes to old fun things that you would find, scrapbooks, hands down. And keep in mind, though, too, I've got a collection of over 1,000 buttons and 500 pennants and trinkets. My whole room is decorated. It's been on ESPN, the Big Ten Network, you name it. It's been all over, magazine articles, things of that written about it. And the book, the first book we did, has a majority of my items in it, as well as other items from other collectors. But there's a lot of stories, like a button from the 1902 Rose Bowl with Fielding Yost's picture on it. Those are just awesome. And all those are in book number 1. And we call them book number 1 and number 2 because they're the exact same size, only book number 2, the one we're putting out in August, has got an extra approximately 130 pages. So it's about 20% bigger and a thicker binding and things of that nature. So I hope I've answered your question. Just a lot of great finds. And because I've networked for almost 50 years. And when I was a federal agent, I was living in South America, and I would subscribe to Sports Collectors Digest and get it and just devour it, looking for any minute items, and call people from South America. I think they probably thought I was nuts. But I was able to purchase things while I was overseas, thanks to magazines such as Sports Collectors Digest. There really wasn't the internet and all that eBay stuff at that point in time. So then there's other things. For example, when I was in South America, I had a postcard made of the 1927 Michigan Navy game. And that postcard had a great image on it. And the image had just a Michigan football player kicking the ball, but it's a beautiful image. But then I printed thousands of those, and I wrote on the back collecting Michigan football programs and tickets and scrapbooks, and that was all listed on the back. And then whenever my assignment took me to another location, I bought a rubber stamp, and I would just stamp the back of the cards and hand those out at shows, antique malls. I'd mail them, you name it, mass mailer. So.
Wow, very, very interesting. Now, your first book, is that also available at the same web address that you gave us, the umishfootball.com?
It certainly is. And it's called The Ultimate Guide to Michigan Football Collectors, or Collectibles. And Brian Schneider was involved in that. There are a few things I want to show you as well before we sign off today.
Okay.
I'll tell you a couple more quick little things. But those are the two ways that you can get those books. And then there's 2 other books that I've written. I wrote one on the Little Brown Jug, the Michigan-Minnesota rivalry, Arcadia Publishing. And I also wrote one called The Game, the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry. And these are also books that take a look at memorabilia, but they tell a story. They take the history of the Michigan-Ohio State series from the very beginning, and they might show a picture of the 1900 team and the 1902 ticket stub or something of that nature, and then write paragraphs as we go through, showing the memorabilia, but telling the story of the Wolverine battle against the Buckeyes or the Wolverine battle for the Little Brown Jug with Minnesota. So I'm very proud of those two books. Those you can get on Amazon through Arcadia Publishing. If you just Google Ken McGee, Magee, you can find those books.
Okay. Very interesting. Now, you said you had a couple more pieces that you wanted to tell us some stories about.
I wanted to briefly just show you, and it's hard for your readers to see this. I'm holding up a notebook here with 200 pages, plastic pages, like a baseball card whole page. This is my ticket stub collection. This is how I hang on to all of these tickets. If you can see, there's 6 to a page, and there's hundreds of pages. And so that's how I keep track of what I have when it comes to tickets. And I urge the collectors out there and the listeners, when you do get your tickets, when you go to a game, just don't crinkle them up, throw them in your wallet, put them in something a little bit safer, and then store them. It's a good idea to store them. With that being said, I also wanted to explain that we talk in the book too about the increased demise of football tickets and programs because media is taking over. I went to the Orange Bowl this year. The only people who got tickets at the Orange Bowl was the parents of the players, actual paper tickets. All the other tickets were via their mobile cell phones. So I think the ticket is somewhat of a dying trend that we have seen for centuries for sports events and you name it. And that's sad to me. So I encourage people to preserve their tickets like they're decaying fresco works of art on Italian museums. You've got to take good care of them. I wanted to show you as well the cover of the book. The cover of the book is a collage, and the collage is a bunch of programs and tickets. And we wanted to make the front cover very appealable, and the back cover has a lot of the exact same thing. And I touched base earlier about this book saying there's a synopsis written on every single game. Briefly, I wanted to say there was 2 guys named Jim Parker and Bob Rozick, both of them Michigan football historians in their own way. They don't even know each other, but I know them both. And one lives in Michigan, one lives in Washington. I contacted both of them and said, I'm going to write this book. Can I borrow your synopsises that you guys have written on over 1,000 games? So they were both obliged and were very kind about it. So Brian and I took the two together, the 2 synopsises, and that's how we blended our own synopsis for the book. So a book like this was definitely, in the words of Bo Schembechler, the team. Because if it wasn't for this team of incredible people, unbelievable people, this book would have never happened. And hats off to all of them, as well as Brian Schneider, who's the guy that puts the computer program together and gets all this stuff done. I'm the collector, the spokesman, but the nuts and bolts of it, the guys working the front line basically, and is a guy like Brian Schneider. So.
Well, that's quite a statement there of all your team put together. Those are the guys in the trenches, like you said. You're the quarterback, and getting the glory and getting some FaceTime and some podcast time and what the like. So very cool. And I really like the idea that you took your collection and put it out there, and then to add the synopsis of those historians that you. From what you're saying, you hold in very high regard what they say. So you really have a great piece of history, and you got some memorabilia photos to go with it. So sounds like a great book to have in anybody's collection.
Well, my goal is to have them walk into a store and say, honey, to their wife, remember that first game I took you to back in 1967? And she says, yes, I do. It was snowing. And then they pull open the book and they look back and they go, wow, that's the ticket. That's the program. And then they read that synopsis and it says it was a snowy day as the Wolverines were battling, whatever the case may be. And, that's my goal, is to bring back these memories, but also preserve history. Because I said earlier, a lot of this stuff is going away. Media is just social media and this whole computer world that we live in is making these things go away. So that's kind of my goal, just so people can look back. And I don't expect anybody to pick up the book and read it from page 1 to the end. I've done that a dozen times, 30 dozen times while we've been proofreading it. That's not going to happen, I don't think. However, you can pick it up and turn to any page and look and say, wow, that's some cool graphics.
Well, it definitely sounds like it is. Why don't you give us one more time where folks can get a copy or pre-order a copy?
Sure. Okay, you can go to UMich Football. That's U like university, Mich like Michigan, MICH, football.com. UMich Football, and you enter the code GOBLUE, you get a $10 discount. You also get a limited edition special card depicting the evolution of the Michigan uniform, which was done with artists who did a great job on that. That's number one. Number two is you can always call my cell phone at area code 503-781-3174 and send me a call or a text. And if you're interested in bulk purchases, we can work out a deal on that as well. So those are the two ways to get a hold of us. And both book number one on collectibles is available at the exact same website, umishfootball.com, as well as this new book that's coming out August 12th. It's a self-published book. We're putting all the money up front. So it's a limited edition print run, and we're really excited about it. And I'm pleased as punch that some other historians have looked at it and just said, I've never seen anything like this in my life. I don't think this will ever be replicated. But I challenge some of the good listeners of yours out there to feel free to put together a book on another school or whatever. And when it comes to this book, you've got Michigan State, Purdue, Ohio State, Northwestern, you name it, all these different schools. So it's not just a Michigan football collectible book, because it will show everything known to exist for any of those other teams throughout the series between Michigan from the mid 1800s to 2021.
Well, Ken McGee, thank you very much for sharing, the history of Michigan football and preserving it in a great book that we could all enjoy and have in our homes. Again, that book is called The Ultimate Michigan Football Program and Ticket Guide by Mr. Ken McGee and Brian Snyder, and have some write-ups of some great historians, as Ken said. So, Ken, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're very welcome, and thank you so very much for having me. And at the end of the day, just remember, go blue.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. A special thanks to the talents of Mike and Jean Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
It was just another ordinary day in the offices of the Pittsburgh Guardian newspaper circa 1924. But for Marla Delft, assistant editor, everything was about to change. For she was about to discover the awesome attractiveness of Row 1 brand retro sports paraphernalia items thanks to Orville Mulligan, sports writer.
And there it is.
Wow, Orville, that's really the bee's knees.
Isn't it just? A poster-sized replica of the actual 1909 World Series program cover.
I can see that. But where did you get it? And where'd you get it framed?
I ordered it from the Row 1 website, where over 6,000 items of sports memorabilia from the 1880s to the 1990s are available for reproduction, in multiple sizes and in several different materials, with over a dozen styles of frame to choose from for prints like this.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Delft would love to put up more of these in the office. But I'm equally as sure they're beyond this newspaper's budget.
Not at all, my dear Marla. See for yourself. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. Oh my, these are good prices. Oh, and look at this stuff. Oklahoma-Nebraska football, college basketball art, Michael Jordan items.
And so it
Retro
was that
sports
Marla Delft
advertisement
discovered the
placards.
splendiferous magic of Row 1 sports memorabilia, arts, and prints. You can too by visiting sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. That's ROW number 1 today for access to the full Row 1 catalog of gallery prints and gifts like t-shirts, long-sleeve shirts, telephone cases, coffee mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Act today for 15% discount off all prints with coupon code SHN15 and 20% off all other items with coupon code SHN20 at checkout. And keep your dial locked to the Sports History Network for the exciting chronicles of the 1920 sports world in Orville Mulligan, Sports Writer. Coming soon.